All right, so number 9, we want to find the inverse, and we want to graph both f and f inverse on the same axis and check their required symmetry. Okay, so we're given that f of x is equal to the square root of x plus 2, and then they are telling us that the domain x is greater than or equal to negative 2. Okay, so if you just refer back to the parent function, which I have pulled up from our course, so these are all the parent functions. So the square root function starts out with a domain from 0 to infinity because we cannot take the square root of a negative, so we don't go past 0. And then the range is going from 0 to infinity as well. Now, with our function, this plus 2, when you think about transformation, it shifts the graph left 2 units. So if we were to graph this function, it would get shifted over 1, 2, and it would have that same general shape curving here. So that is why our domain is going from negative 2 instead of 0 to infinity. Okay, so this is our domain. The range, however, remains intact. Range is still starting at 0 and going to infinity. Now, when we do the inverse, okay, we already know that the domain and range are just going to flip-flop. So we're going to say domain of f inverse and the range of f inverse. We know those will just be the reciprocal of these two. So domain is the range, which is 0 to infinity, and the range is going to be the previous domain, which will be negative 2 to infinity. Now, to actually solve it out, we're going to write x in the place of y equals square root of y plus 2, and then solve for y. We would square both sides to get rid of the square root, and so we would get x squared, and this would be equal to y plus 2, and then we would subtract 2. So we get x squared minus 2 equals y. Rearrange this, we get y equals x squared minus 2. Now, x squared is a parabola, okay? But we have to remember the restrictions. So remember that domain restriction. We can only use positive values from 0 to infinity, so we won't get that whole parabola. So like if I were to graph this parabola here, and this is the inverse, okay, so we will write f inverse of 1 of x. So if we were to graph a parabola, it would be shifted down 2 units, 1, 2, and then you would have this parabola that just opens up, and you have one on both sides. But this little dotted line side would not be part because our domain is restricted, so we would not get this piece. So if I were to graph both of these on the same axis, that would be 1, 2, and that would be a curved line going up, and so the line y equals x would go right through the middle as such. So let's check f of x inverse. We get x squared minus 2. Gotta get down. Minus 2. And this is for x is greater than 0. That is the domain of the inverse. And then picking out the graph that shows D would be the best answer choice there.